Rachel Morgan never anticipated that stepping into St. John's Medical Center would thrust her into a silent battlefield. She walked in as a nurse, driven by compassion, yet soon found herself engulfed by whispers, cold stares, and the suffocating weight of prejudice. Her every move was watched, every decision questioned, until one fateful encounter with a mysterious patient revealed a hidden power. Little did she know, this chance meeting would ignite a battle for justice that would shake the very foundations of the hospital. But could one woman's courage truly uproot a system built on discrimination? Rachel Morgan walked into St. John's Medical Center on her first day with a hopeful heart and a confident stride. Freshly recruited, she was excited to bring her nursing expertise to this renowned hospital, one she had long admired. As a skilled black nurse with years of experience, she had overcome numerous challenges in her career, but she had always believed that hard work and dedication could speak for themselves. St. John's Medical Center, however, seemed to hold an unexpected chill in the air. The elegant corridors lined with marble floors and polished brass signage did little to mask the subtle sense of exclusion Rachel felt as she moved through her new workplace. When she introduced herself to fellow nurses and doctors, she noticed polite nods and brief smiles. But few seemed interested in engaging beyond surface-level pleasantries. At first, Rachel shrugged it off, assuming they were simply busy with their demanding schedules. But the feeling persisted, and her instincts told her something deeper was at play. As she made her way to her assigned department, Rachel passed a group of nurses huddled by the coffee station. Their laughter faded as she approached, and they exchanged quick, uncomfortable glances. She caught snippets of whispered comments, words like quota hire and diversity push, which made her stomach tighten. Rachel forced herself to focus on the positives, reminding herself that she was here to make a difference in patient care. She had weathered countless storms in her career, and this would be no different. Shortly after her orientation, Rachel met the head of her department, Dr. Michael Hastings. Tall, silver-haired, and sharply dressed, Dr. Hastings was respected and well known for his work in internal medicine. Rachel had heard of his strict management style, but had hoped his reputation for professionalism would translate into a fair working relationship. However, from the very start, Dr. Hastings made his opinions about Rachel abundantly clear. He looked at her with a cool, almost disdainful expression, scrutinizing her resume with an air of skepticism that stung. "So, Rachel Morgan," he began, tapping his pen on her resume. "You've worked in several hospitals before coming here. Why is that?" Rachel hesitated, caught off guard by his tone. "Well, I've moved a few times for personal reasons, but I've gained valuable experience along the way. I'm excited to bring my skills to St. John's." Dr. Hastings raised an eyebrow, the corners of his mouth turning downward. "I see. I suppose we'll see if your experience lives up to our standards. St. John's isn't just any hospital, Miss Morgan." The words felt like a slap, but Rachel maintained her composure. She had anticipated some skepticism, but not outright hostility. Despite her best efforts to bridge the gap, Dr. Hastings consistently undermined her in subtle yet unmistakable ways. During rounds, he often dismissed her input, even when she knew her suggestions would benefit the patients. He seemed to relish correcting her on minor details, his tone dripping with condescension. The hostile environment extended beyond Dr. Hastings. Many of her colleagues appeared distant, even hostile, as if she were an intruder rather than a fellow healthcare professional. One of the nurses, Amanda, openly made snide remarks whenever Rachel was within earshot. "Guess we have to be careful around Nurse Morgan," Amanda sneered one day, her voice carrying across the nurses' station. "She'll probably report us for not being politically correct enough." Rachel bit back a retort, feeling her patience thin. The last thing she wanted was to engage in a confrontation that could make her position even more precarious. But the isolation, the whispers, and the underlying tension were wearing her down. She felt as though she were constantly under surveillance, with every move, every decision, scrutinized through a harsher lens. Each day, Rachel focused on her work, pouring all her energy into caring for her patients. She knew that the best way to prove herself was through her actions, and she was determined not to let the prejudice of others diminish her dedication. Her patients, at least, seemed to appreciate her kindness and professionalism. Some would even ask specifically for her, grateful for her attentive care and warm bedside manner. It was these moments that kept her going, small reminders that her work had value, even if it went unacknowledged by her colleagues. One day, while Rachel was charting patient updates, a young nurse named Linda approached her. Linda was one of the few colleagues who treated Rachel with kindness, often offering a smile or a word of encouragement. "Hey, Rachel," Linda said softly, glancing around before leaning in. "I know things haven't been easy here, but just know that not everyone feels the same way as Dr. Hastings and the others." Rachel looked up, touched by Linda's sincerity. "Thank you, Linda. I appreciate it more than you know. It's been difficult to feel welcome here." Linda gave a sympathetic nod. "You're a great nurse. Some people just have a hard time accepting change. Don't let them get to you." Rachel nodded, her resolve hardening. Linda's words were a lifeline, a reminder that there were still good people who valued skill and integrity over prejudice. She decided then and there that she would continue to give her all, no matter the resistance. She hadn't come this far to be defeated by the narrow-mindedness of a few individuals. However, things took a darker turn when Rachel discovered that Dr. Hastings had been influencing patient assignments, ensuring she was given some of the most challenging and time-consuming cases. It was a tactic to wear her down, to keep her constantly under pressure and make any mistake seem inevitable. Rachel knew she was being set up to fail, but she refused to give him the satisfaction. Her exhaustion grew with each shift, but she remained determined to prove her worth. Each time Dr. Hastings questioned her decisions or dismissed her in front of other staff, Rachel reminded herself of her purpose. She was here to make a difference, to care for her patients, and she wouldn't let anyone drive her away from that goal. One evening, after a grueling double shift, Rachel sat alone in the break room, her shoulders slumped in exhaustion. She held her mother's old nursing pin, a symbol of resilience passed down to her. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. "Be strong, Rachel. You are capable of more than they'll ever see." As she held the pin, a surge of determination welled within her. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for every patient who needed her, every young nurse who would follow in her footsteps, and for the woman her mother had raised her to be. She would endure, she would push through, and she would continue to give her best, no matter the obstacles. But in the midst of her struggles, Rachel had no way of knowing that her life was about to take a surprising turn, one that would shake St. John's Medical Center to its core and force everyone, from the lowest-ranking nurse to the head doctors, to confront the truth of their biases. Soon, a powerful stranger would enter her world, and with him, the opportunity for change that she had long believed impossible. Rachel's days at St. John's Medical Center were long and grueling. Every shift was a test of her endurance, both physically and emotionally. Despite her skill and dedication, it seemed her efforts were constantly undercut by Dr. Hastings, who never missed an opportunity to criticize her work. His comments were rarely overtly hostile, but they were sharp enough to remind her of her outsider status. Her reputation within the hospital was slowly being shaped by his words, a fact that Rachel couldn't ignore. Each time he dismissed her input during rounds or assigned her to cases that felt more like punishment than practice, Rachel felt the weight of his bias press heavier on her shoulders. She began to sense that others were noticing too, with some staff members keeping their distance, silently observing the cold war between her and the head of her department. But despite this, Rachel refused to give in. She continued to pour everything into her work, focusing on her patients as a source of strength. Each kind word from a grateful patient, each smile, served as a reminder that she was making a difference, even if the administration refused to acknowledge it. She knew that proving herself would take time, but she was determined to endure, holding on to her mother's wisdom that had guided her through every trial in her life. One particular patient, a middle-aged man named Mr. Matthew Thornton, had recently been admitted for complications related to heart disease. He was soft-spoken, with a warm smile that Rachel found comforting amid the chaos. She was assigned to him, spending hours each day monitoring his condition, administering medication, and explaining his treatment plan. Mr. Thornton seemed to sense her burden, often watching her with an understanding gaze that made her feel, even if just for a moment, that she wasn't alone. "Miss Morgan," he said one afternoon as she adjusted his IV, "you're a fine nurse, you know that?" Rachel gave him a polite smile. "Thank you, Mr. Thornton. I try to do my best." He looked at her, a hint of sadness in his eyes. "I can see that things aren't easy for you here, but don't let them make you feel less than you are." His words touched her deeply, and for a moment, Rachel felt a wave of relief that she had longed for. She squeezed his hand, grateful for his kindness. "Thank you, Mr. Thornton. I appreciate that more than you know." However, as the days wore on, Rachel's patience was tested more than ever. Dr. Hastings continued his attempts to undermine her, assigning her additional responsibilities that left her with barely any time for breaks. Her shifts were exhausting, and she would often return home feeling drained, but Rachel refused to let it break her. She was determined to prove herself, not just to Dr. Hastings, but to everyone who doubted her place at St. John's. One day, as Rachel was making her rounds, she was assigned a new patient who had been admitted under an assumed name, Tom Ellis. She noticed that there was something different about this patient. He carried himself with a quiet authority that didn't match the other patients she had encountered. He seemed to observe everything around him, his piercing gaze catching details most people would overlook. "Good morning, Mr. Ellis," she greeted him with her usual warmth, smiling as she checked his chart. "I'm Rachel, your nurse." He returned her smile, though there was a trace of curiosity in his eyes. "Thank you, Rachel. You seem like you're running a tight ship around here," he said with a dry chuckle. Rachel laughed softly, brushing off the compliment. "I try. It's a bit of a circus, but I manage." As the days went by, Rachel and Mr. Ellis developed an easy rapport. He was an engaging conversationalist, often asking her questions about her background, her family, and why she had chosen nursing. At first she was guarded, unsure of his intentions. But over time, his genuine interest put her at ease, and she found herself opening up, sharing pieces of her life that she rarely disclosed to others. Rachel found herself enjoying her time with Mr. Ellis, as their conversations provided a brief reprieve from the hostilities she faced daily. One afternoon, after she shared a particularly difficult experience from her past, he looked at her with an expression of respect and admiration. "You know, Rachel," he said, his tone sincere, "it's rare to meet someone with your strength and compassion. It's clear you care deeply about your patients. That's not something everyone possesses." Rachel felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. For so long she had worked in silence, facing criticism and bias with no acknowledgement of her dedication. Hearing someone recognize her hard work, even if it was just one patient, meant more to her than he could know. But Mr. Ellis noticed more than Rachel realized. One day, while Rachel was away from his room, he observed Dr. Hastings berating her at the nurse's station, his voice loud enough to echo down the hallway. Mr. Ellis's expression hardened as he took in the scene, noting the way Dr. Hastings spoke to her with barely concealed disdain and contempt. The incident left a sour taste in his mouth, and he began to suspect that Rachel's challenges extended beyond the typical demands of her job. Mr. Ellis's observations deepened over the following days as he watched Rachel's interactions with her colleagues and superiors. It became clear to him that she was operating under a cloud of prejudice, one that tainted the professionalism that should have characterized her work environment. He saw the subtle glances, the whispered remarks, and the dismissive gestures that Rachel faced regularly. It troubled him deeply. Then, one evening, as Rachel was ending her shift, Mr. Ellis noticed that she seemed particularly drained, her shoulders slumped and her expression weary. He motioned for her to come closer, his tone soft and inviting. "Rachel," he began, his voice filled with a quiet determination, "I want you to know that I see what you're going through, and I assure you, you don't deserve any of it." Rachel's eyes widened, taken aback by his words. She had grown so accustomed to the silent hostility around her that hearing someone validate her experience felt almost surreal. "I don't know what you mean, Mr. Ellis," she said, her voice cautious, though her heart raced. He smiled gently. "You don't have to explain. Just know that not everyone here is blind to what's happening. You're an exceptional nurse, Rachel, and sooner or later, that truth will come to light." She smiled, touched by his kindness, though she was unsure of what he meant. Part of her dismissed it as a well-intentioned attempt to comfort her. But another part of her, the part that clung to hope, wondered if there was more to Mr. Ellis than met the eye. A few days later, Rachel was called into Dr. Hastings' office for a review. As she entered, she felt the familiar sting of anxiety. Dr. Hastings didn't waste time, beginning his critique with a cold, measured tone. "Miss Morgan," he said, his gaze stern, "I have been monitoring your performance closely, and frankly, I find it lacking in the standards we uphold at St. John's." Rachel felt a surge of anger and hurt, though she kept her expression neutral. She had worked tirelessly, often going beyond her duties, and yet her efforts were dismissed as inadequate. Before she could respond, however, a sudden knock at the door interrupted the meeting. The door opened, and to Rachel's shock, Mr. Ellis walked in, his expression one of calm authority. "Apologies, Dr. Hastings," he said smoothly, ignoring the doctor's startled expression, "but I believe I have a right to join this conversation." Rachel's jaw dropped as Mr. Ellis strode confidently into the room, his demeanor radiating a quiet power that Dr. Hastings couldn't ignore. Dr. Hastings stared at him, confusion and frustration etched on his face. "Who are you to interrupt my meeting?" Dr. Hastings demanded, his voice laced with irritation. Mr. Ellis looked directly at Rachel, a reassuring smile on his lips. "Allow me to introduce myself properly. I'm Thomas Evans, CEO of the hospital's parent company." Rachel's heart raced as she processed his words, and she watched as Dr. Hastings' expression shifted from irritation to shock. Thomas's gaze shifted back to Dr. Hastings, his expression unyielding. "I've been observing the way you treat your staff, Dr. Hastings," Thomas continued, his voice steady. "And I must say I find it severely lacking in the standards we uphold at St. John's." Dr. Hastings stammered, his face paling. Rachel felt a surge of relief and vindication as Thomas's words echoed in the room. For the first time, someone had recognized her struggle, someone with the power to bring about real change. And in that moment, she realized that her battle was far from over. But with Thomas by her side, she no longer felt alone in the fight for respect, equality, and the right to work in an environment that valued her worth. The air in Dr. Hastings' office grew tense, charged with the unspoken power shift that Thomas Evans' presence demanded. Rachel stood rooted to the spot, processing the revelation that her supportive patient was none other than the CEO of the hospital's parent company. The quiet authority he exuded suddenly made sense, and she felt a rush of hope mingled with disbelief. Dr. Hastings, however, struggled to mask his shock. His mouth opened, then closed as he searched for words. The smug confidence he had wielded so readily faltered under Thomas's scrutinizing gaze. "Mr. Evans, I wasn't aware that you—" Dr. Hastings stammered, his face flushed as he stumbled over his words. His usual arrogance had crumbled, leaving a man grappling for control. Thomas cut him off with a calm but commanding tone. "Yes, Dr. Hastings, you weren't aware. I admit, I didn't come here to observe the staff initially, but during my time here, I've seen enough to warrant an investigation into the management practices of this hospital, specifically your behavior." Dr. Hastings' face went pale. Rachel could see him recalculating, trying to recover his footing. She almost felt a sense of poetic justice as she watched his reaction, the tables turning in a way she hadn't dared to imagine. "Mr. Evans," Dr. Hastings finally managed, trying to regain his composure, "I assure you, I have always held St. John's to the highest standards. I may have appeared strict with Miss Morgan, but only because I expect excellence from my staff. It is nothing personal." Thomas arched an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "Strictness is one thing, Dr. Hastings. However, the discrimination and exclusion I've observed go beyond professional standards. Your treatment of Miss Morgan and your dismissive attitude toward her abilities are not reflective of the values we strive to uphold. Excellence isn't achieved by tearing down those around us." Rachel's heart pounded as she watched Thomas speak on her behalf with such conviction. His words were like balm to her wounds, validation she had longed for since her first day at St. John's. For so long she had questioned her worth, wondering if she truly belonged. Now, seeing Dr. Hastings on the defensive, she felt an empowering sense of vindication. Miss Morgan's performance has been nothing short of exemplary, Thomas continued, glancing briefly at Rachel with a reassuring nod. I've observed her dedication firsthand. Her compassion and commitment to patient care are a testament to the kind of professionals we should be cultivating in this institution. Instead, she's been subjected to unwarranted scrutiny and discrimination. Dr. Hastings's gaze shifted uncomfortably, his hands clasped tightly on his desk. With all due respect, Mr. Evans, With all due respect, Dr. Hastings, Thomas interrupted smoothly, your actions have compromised not only the morale of your staff, but the very principles this hospital claims to uphold. St. John's should be a place of inclusion, where diversity is respected and valued. Anything less is unacceptable. Rachel saw the fire flicker in Thomas's eyes, a spark of righteousness that sent a thrill through her. Here was someone willing to confront power dynamics head-on, a man who would not be placated with excuses. For so long, she had fought this battle alone, but now, with Thomas standing beside her, she felt a surge of courage she hadn't felt in years. Thomas turned back to Rachel, his expression softening. Miss Morgan, you've shown remarkable strength in handling an environment that has been unnecessarily hostile. I believe that's about to change. Dr. Hastings bristled, but his gaze flickered with something else now, fear. For the first time, he was experiencing what it felt like to be under scrutiny. Rachel took a quiet breath, allowing herself to savor the moment. I'm going to recommend a full review of the hospital's practices regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion, Thomas declared. There will be mandatory training for every member of the staff, with an emphasis on creating a welcoming environment for professionals of all backgrounds. As for you, Dr. Hastings, Thomas's tone hardened. There will be an assessment of your conduct, and your position here will depend on the outcome. Dr. Hastings looked as though he'd been struck, but he managed to maintain a facade of professionalism. Understood, Mr. Evans, he said, his voice laced with reluctant obedience. Thomas gave a curt nod. Good. I trust we understand each other. Rachel felt an overwhelming sense of relief as Thomas turned to her, his demeanor shifting from fierce authority to quiet reassurance. Rachel, you've endured a lot. I'll make sure that you have the support you need moving forward. Unable to find the words, Rachel could only nod, her eyes bright with gratitude. Thomas's intervention had not only protected her position but had also forced St. John's to confront the uncomfortable truth of its own biases. In this moment, she felt the tides finally turning. Following the meeting, word of Thomas's identity and his confrontation with Dr. Hastings spread like wildfire through the hospital. Colleagues who had once been cold toward Rachel now watched her with newfound respect, the tension between her and Dr. Hastings now public knowledge. Rachel sensed that attitudes were shifting, but she remained cautious, wary of lingering biases that might still run deep. Thomas followed through with his promise, launching a formal review of St. John's practices. Meetings were held with staff at every level, during which diversity training was implemented to promote respect and understanding among colleagues. As Thomas continued to oversee the process, he encouraged Rachel to share her experiences, empowering her to voice the struggles she had endured. Rachel found herself in a new position of influence. Her experiences given weight and consideration in ways she had once thought impossible. Staff members began to see her not just as a competent nurse, but as a symbol of resilience. Rachel, who had once been treated as an outsider, was now at the heart of the hospital's transformation. Dr. Hastings, meanwhile, became increasingly isolated. The same colleagues who had once supported him now distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with his behavior. His dismissal, which came after the review, felt like a fitting conclusion to Rachel's struggle. She had endured his prejudice with grace, and now, with him gone, she felt a sense of closure. One morning, Thomas invited Rachel for coffee in the hospital's courtyard, where he sat across from her with a gentle smile. "How are you feeling with all these changes?" he asked, genuinely interested. Rachel hesitated, searching for the right words. Relieved, grateful. But, to be honest, it's also a bit overwhelming. I never imagined things would change this much. Thomas nodded thoughtfully. I understand. Change can be daunting, especially when it challenges the status quo. But I believe your courage has sparked something important here, Rachel. He paused, his expression turning serious. There's something I'd like to propose. We're creating a new role. Chief Diversity Officer for the hospital and its affiliated locations. I believe you'd be perfect for the position. You've already shown that you have the strength and insight to lead change. Rachel's breath caught as she processed his words. She had spent so long fighting for acceptance in this institution, and now Thomas was offering her a role that would allow her to advocate for inclusivity on a larger scale. Are you serious? She asked, a mix of shock and excitement in her voice. Thomas smiled warmly. Completely. I've seen the impact you've had here. Imagine what you could do if you had the authority to implement lasting change, not just here at St. John's, but throughout our network. Rachel's heart pounded with a mixture of pride and purpose. This role would be a chance to bring her experience to bear, to create the kind of environment she had once yearned for. She could help others avoid the struggles she had faced, building a hospital culture that valued each person's unique contributions. I don't know what to say, Thomas, she replied, her voice filled with gratitude. Thank you. I would be honored to take on the role. Thomas nodded, satisfaction gleaming in his eyes. I'm confident you'll do great things, Rachel. You've already proven that. As Rachel accepted her new position, she felt an overwhelming sense of fulfillment. She had not only survived her struggles at St. John's, but had come out stronger, ready to lead others toward a more inclusive future. Rachel's first day as Chief Diversity Officer at St. John's Medical Center felt like a new beginning. The hospital corridors she had once walked with apprehension now held a different meaning. She was no longer an outsider striving to prove herself. She was a leader, entrusted with the responsibility to drive change. The title on her office door was a tangible reminder of the journey she had endured and the battles she had fought. Her first step was to conduct a comprehensive review of St. John's policies, examining everything from hiring practices to team dynamics. She recognized that changing attitudes and mindsets would require a thorough, thoughtful approach. Diversity and inclusivity could not simply be mandated. They needed to be understood and embraced. Thomas, true to his word, provided unwavering support, backing Rachel's initiatives with the full weight of his authority. With his backing, she assembled a small team of like-minded individuals from various departments, individuals who shared her passion for creating a more inclusive environment. She invited Linda, the nurse who had shown her kindness early on, to join the team. Linda, grateful and inspired by Rachel's strength, eagerly accepted. Rachel, I can't tell you how proud I am to be part of this, Linda said during their first meeting. You've turned what could have been a nightmare into an opportunity for everyone. Rachel smiled, grateful for Linda's encouragement. We're just getting started, Linda. I want everyone here to feel respected and valued, and I know it won't be easy. But if we can make even one person's experience better, it'll be worth it. The team's first initiative was a series of mandatory diversity and sensitivity training workshops for all staff. Rachel believed that true change would only happen if people recognized their own biases and understood how they affected others. The sessions were designed to encourage open discussions, allowing staff members to confront uncomfortable truths in a supportive environment. The workshops, however, were met with mixed reactions. Some employees were receptive, eager to participate and learn, while others showed reluctance, grumbling about wasting time, and questioning the need for such training. In one session, Rachel encountered Dr. Stevens, an experienced physician known for his old-school approach. As she led the group through an exercise on recognizing implicit biases, Dr. Stevens folded his arms, his expression skeptical. Miss Morgan, he said, his voice dripping with condescension, I've been working in this field for over 20 years. I don't need a lecture on how to treat people. Rachel held his gaze calmly, undeterred. I appreciate your experience, Dr. Stevens. This isn't about questioning your professionalism. It's about helping all of us recognize biases we may not even be aware of. Even experienced professionals can learn something new. Dr. Stevens huffed, shaking his head, but Rachel saw a few heads nodding among the attendees. She knew that resistance was part of the process, and she would not be deterred by those unwilling to change. She continued leading the sessions with patience and compassion, knowing that even small shifts in attitude could make a big difference over time. The transformation within St. John's became increasingly visible as Rachel's initiatives gained traction. Staff who had once ignored her now greeted her warmly, recognizing her as a leader. Nurses who had been skeptical began to approach her for advice, seeking guidance on how to navigate challenges in their roles. Rachel's presence became a source of inspiration, her journey a testament to the power of resilience and perseverance. However, not everyone welcomed the changes with open arms. Some staff members continued to resist, clinging to old biases and resenting Rachel's influence. The resentment grew among a small group, who whispered among themselves, labeling her initiatives as unnecessary and politically correct nonsense. One day, Rachel received an anonymous letter in her office mailbox. The letter was scrawled in angry handwriting, accusing her of changing things that didn't need fixing and pushing a personal agenda. It was a stark reminder that prejudice still lingered within the walls of the hospital, a poison that would not be eradicated overnight. Rachel read the letter quietly, her resolve hardening. She had faced worse in her life, and this letter was not enough to shake her commitment. If anything, it fueled her determination to keep pushing forward, knowing that there were still minds left to change. Thomas, ever the supportive ally, noticed the strain on Rachel's face one evening and invited her to his office for a private chat. As she entered, he offered her a seat and poured her a cup of tea. "I heard about the letter," he said gently, his tone filled with concern. "I'm sorry you're dealing with that, Rachel. You don't deserve it." Rachel managed a small smile, grateful for his empathy. "Thank you, Thomas. I knew this wouldn't be easy, but sometimes it's hard not to feel like I'm fighting an uphill battle." Thomas leaned forward, his gaze steady. "I've seen the progress you've made, Rachel. The changes are already visible. Don't let a few closed minds make you doubt yourself. Remember, you're making a difference, one step at a time." His words bolstered her, reminding her of the impact she had already made. With renewed determination, Rachel returned to her work, implementing policies that would outlast any resistance. She established mentorship programs to support new hires from diverse backgrounds, ensuring they would never feel the isolation she had experienced. The program matched senior staff with junior employees, fostering connections and building a network of support. The results were tangible. Staff members who had once felt overlooked now found themselves included in decisions and projects. Patients began to notice the shift in atmosphere as well, expressing gratitude for the welcoming, respectful environment. St. John's, once steeped in prejudice, was slowly becoming a place where inclusivity was more than just a buzzword. It was a lived value. One evening, as Rachel walked through the hospital's corridors, she felt a deep sense of pride. She stopped by the patient wing and looked into the rooms where nurses and doctors worked together seamlessly, their interactions genuine and warm. The energy in the hospital had transformed, and she knew that her efforts had been worth every struggle. Rachel had become a symbol of change at St. John's, her leadership inspiring others to examine their biases and embrace inclusivity. Her journey resonated not only within the walls of the hospital, but beyond, reaching other healthcare professionals who looked to St. John's as a model for progress. The pinnacle of her efforts came during a public ceremony organized by Thomas, where Rachel was recognized for her contributions to the hospital. As she stood on stage, accepting the award from Thomas, she looked out at the audience. A sea of faces filled with admiration and gratitude. The staff who had once doubted her now looked to her with respect, and the patients she had fought to protect watched her with pride. In her acceptance speech, Rachel spoke from the heart, her words both a reflection on her journey and a call to action for everyone present. "When I first came to St. John's, I faced challenges I never expected," she began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "There were moments when I doubted myself, when I wondered if I was truly meant to be here. But through the support of allies and the courage to persevere, I've learned that change is possible, if we have the resilience to fight for it." She paused, her gaze sweeping the crowd. "This award is not just for me. It's for everyone who has ever felt unseen, unheard, or undervalued. It's a testament to the power of inclusion, to the belief that each of us has something valuable to offer." Let this be a reminder that diversity is not just an asset. It's a strength that enriches us all. The applause was thunderous, filling the hall with a resounding affirmation of her message. As Rachel looked out at the crowd, she felt a profound sense of fulfillment. She had come to St. John's as an outsider, but she was leaving a legacy that would endure, a foundation upon which future generations could build. Rachel's role as Chief Diversity Officer extended beyond St. John's as she took on an advisory position within Thomas's healthcare network, working to implement similar reforms across multiple hospitals. Her work became a movement, inspiring other institutions to follow suit, embracing diversity and inclusion as essential components of their missions. Through her journey, Rachel had transformed from a nurse struggling to be seen to a leader whose impact reached far and wide. She had faced prejudice, isolation, and doubt, but in the end, she emerged stronger, leaving behind a legacy of compassion, resilience, and the unyielding belief that change was possible. Rachel's story was no longer just her own. It was a testament to the power of hope, courage, and the determination to fight for a better world. And as she looked to the future, she knew that her work was far from over. But she was ready for whatever came next. Months passed, and Rachel's influence at St. John's Medical Center began to manifest in ways that were both visible and profound. The once cold corridors now hummed with the energy of a renewed workplace culture, where diversity and respect were actively practiced rather than merely preached. Staff meetings incorporated Rachel's input on inclusive practices, with team-building exercises designed to bridge gaps between employees from different backgrounds. Rachel's role as Chief Diversity Officer expanded as her initiatives gained momentum. She was no longer just a leader within St. John's. She had become a guiding force for Thomas's entire healthcare network. Hospitals in nearby cities took note of St. John's transformation, reaching out for guidance on how to replicate the success within their own facilities. Soon, Rachel found herself overseeing training sessions and advising on diversity programs at various hospitals, her influence spreading beyond her initial position. One morning, during a regional healthcare conference, Rachel was invited to speak about her work. As she stepped onto the stage, looking out at an audience of healthcare professionals, administrators, and policymakers, she took a deep breath, feeling both the weight and privilege of her journey. She was no longer a nurse fighting for acceptance, but a leader shaping the future of healthcare culture. "Good morning," she began, her voice filled with warmth and conviction. "My journey at St. John's Medical Center taught me many things, but above all, it reminded me of the power that each of us holds to create change. When I started at St. John's, I faced challenges that made me question my place. But through resilience, the support of allies, and the courage to confront difficult truths, I discovered that change is possible, even in the most unlikely of places." She paused, letting her words settle over the audience. Inclusion is not just a box to check. It's a fundamental element of compassionate care. When our healthcare institutions reflect the communities they serve, we create spaces where everyone, patients and staff alike, can thrive. The applause was heartfelt, and as Rachel looked out at the faces of those who had come to learn from her experiences, she felt a deep sense of purpose. Her journey was no longer just about her struggles. It was about a collective movement, a new approach to healthcare that valued empathy, respect, and understanding. Back at St. John's, the impact of Rachel's work became increasingly evident. New hires arrived with a sense of comfort, knowing they were entering a supportive and inclusive environment. Seasoned staff members, many of whom had initially resisted her initiatives, began to embrace the changes, appreciating the positive impact on patient satisfaction and team dynamics. One day, Linda, who had supported Rachel from the start, approached her with a smile. "Rachel," she said, "I just wanted to thank you again. I've seen so many people grow here because of the work you've done. You've created something incredible." Rachel smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "Thank you, Linda. But this change wouldn't have been possible without everyone's willingness to grow. It's a team effort, and I couldn't have done it without the support of people like you." The two friends shared a warm embrace, knowing that they had been part of something transformative. Linda's words were a reminder of the journey they had taken together, from the early days of resistance to the thriving community they now enjoyed. The true test of Rachel's legacy came one afternoon when an elderly woman, Mrs. Franklin, was admitted with a complicated case of pneumonia. She was a woman of few words, but her quiet presence spoke of strength. As Rachel checked her vitals, Mrs. Franklin looked at her, her gaze soft yet piercing. "You remind me of someone," Mrs. Franklin murmured, her voice raspy. Rachel smiled, curious. "Oh, who might that be?" "My daughter," Mrs. Franklin replied, her eyes growing misty. "She was a nurse too. She worked hard, but people, they didn't always see her worth. She was so strong, just like you." The words hit Rachel in a way she hadn't expected. She felt an immediate connection to Mrs. Franklin, recognizing in her story the echoes of her own struggles. She took Mrs. Franklin's hand, offering a comforting squeeze. "Thank you for telling me that," Rachel said softly. "I'll make sure we take the best possible care of you." Mrs. Franklin smiled, her eyes twinkling with gratitude. "I can tell you already are. This place, it feels different, like people actually care." Rachel's heart warmed at the compliment, knowing that her efforts had contributed to creating that environment. The encounter reminded her of the importance of her mission, reaffirming her commitment to ensuring that every person, whether staff or patient, felt valued. Over the following months, Thomas continued to involve Rachel in network-wide initiatives. She helped design policies for diversity in hiring, employee support programs, and patient relations that were implemented across multiple hospitals. Her work even caught the attention of the local media, and soon she was invited to contribute to an article on diversity in healthcare for a national journal. The article, titled "Healing Beyond Medicine: The Power of Diversity in Healthcare," detailed Rachel's journey, her struggles, and the profound impact of her initiatives. Her story resonated with readers across the country, sparking conversations in hospitals, universities, and beyond. As she read the article, Rachel couldn't help but feel overwhelmed by how far she had come. What had started as a lonely battle for acceptance had evolved into a powerful legacy, inspiring change not only at St. John's but throughout the healthcare industry. She had become a beacon of hope, proving that resilience and courage could reshape even the most rigid systems. One evening, Thomas invited Rachel to dinner to celebrate the impact of her work. They sat in a cozy restaurant, their conversation warm and relaxed. Over the course of the evening, Thomas shared his admiration for Rachel's journey, his pride evident in every word. "Rachel," he said, lifting his glass, "you've not only transformed St. John's, but you've also created a ripple effect that will last for generations. I hope you know how remarkable that is." Rachel raised her glass, smiling. "Thank you, Thomas. None of this would have been possible without your belief in me. You gave me the chance to make a difference, and for that, I'll always be grateful." They clinked glasses, a moment of quiet understanding passing between them. Rachel felt a profound sense of fulfillment, knowing that she had not only achieved her dreams, but had surpassed them, leaving a legacy that would endure long after she was gone. As the years went by, Rachel's work continued to inspire change. St. John's became a model for inclusive healthcare, drawing professionals from around the country who wanted to learn from its success. Rachel mentored young nurses, sharing her experiences and encouraging them to pursue their own paths with courage and compassion. One day, as she walked through the hospital's bustling corridors, she overheard a young nurse speaking to a colleague. "I chose St. John's because of what I heard about Rachel Morgan," the nurse said, her voice filled with admiration. "She changed everything here. I want to be like her." Rachel paused, a warm smile spreading across her face. She hadn't set out to become a role model, but knowing that her journey had inspired others filled her with gratitude. She was reminded of her early days, the struggles she had endured, and the people who had believed in her. Every hardship, every moment of doubt, had led her to this. And in that moment, Rachel knew that her legacy was secure, woven into the fabric of St. John's, a testament to resilience, compassion, and the power of one person to create change. As she continued down the hallway, surrounded by the thriving community she had helped build, Rachel felt a deep sense of peace. Her journey was ongoing, but she knew that wherever it led, she would face it with the same strength and purpose that had guided her through every challenge. She was no longer just a nurse or a chief diversity officer. She was a force for good, a leader who had left an indelible mark on the world. And as long as there were people to inspire, battles to fight, and lives to uplift, Rachel knew that her work was far from over. Years had passed since Rachel Morgan had first walked through the doors of St. John's Medical Center, a new nurse facing isolation and prejudice. Now the hospital she had once viewed as a battleground had become a symbol of progress. Its reputation for inclusivity and compassion, a model for healthcare facilities across the nation. Her work as Chief Diversity Officer had reached far beyond St. John's, and her influence continued to ripple through the healthcare industry. Rachel's journey had been documented in medical journals, celebrated in articles, and even taught in leadership seminars. She became a keynote speaker at conferences and was invited to share her story with nursing schools, inspiring young students to value resilience and integrity. Everywhere she went, people spoke of the Morgan Method, an approach to fostering a culture of empathy and inclusion in healthcare. Rachel's efforts had redefined what it meant to lead with compassion, and her work touched lives far beyond her original vision. One sunny afternoon, Rachel was visiting St. John's for an anniversary event commemorating the hospital's transformation. Walking through the hallways, she felt a deep sense of pride as she observed the diversity of the staff and the warm, collaborative atmosphere that had become St. John's defining characteristic. The walls were adorned with photographs of staff and patients, a celebration of the community that had been created within those walls. As she turned a corner, she saw a group of young nurses gathered around a bulletin board displaying announcements for upcoming events, support groups, and mentorship programs. She couldn't help but smile, reminded of the days when she had walked those same halls with a heart full of hope and a mind filled with dreams of change. One of the nurses noticed her and nudged her colleague, who quickly turned and gasped, recognizing Rachel. Within seconds, the group had gathered around her, their faces lighting up with admiration. "Miss Morgan," one of the nurses said, her voice filled with excitement, "it's such an honor to meet you. We've all heard so much about the work you did here. You're the reason I chose to come to St. John's." Rachel chuckled softly, her heart swelling with pride. "Thank you," she replied, her voice warm. "I'm honored to know that my journey has inspired you. But remember, the work you do now is just as important. Each of you has the power to make a difference." Another nurse, a young man with a look of determination, spoke up. "We're starting a new mentorship program for first-year nurses, inspired by what you implemented. It's amazing to see how it's already making a difference. The new hires feel supported from day one." Rachel beamed, feeling a sense of fulfillment beyond words. Her legacy was not just a memory, it was alive, continuing to evolve through the efforts of those who shared her vision. As she walked away from the group, Rachel passed by the office that had once belonged to Dr. Hastings. It had since been transformed into a wellness center for staff, a space for meditation, relaxation, and self-care. The irony was not lost on her, and she felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that the cold, unwelcoming office had been replaced with a sanctuary of healing. Later that day, Rachel took the stage at the anniversary event. Her speech met with thunderous applause. Staff, administrators, patients, and families listened intently as she spoke about the journey of St. John's and the importance of holding on to hope and resilience in the face of adversity. "St. John's was my beginning, but it became so much more," Rachel began, her voice steady. "This hospital represents the strength of people willing to stand for what's right, to create spaces where everyone feels valued. We are not just healthcare providers. We are advocates for humanity, for kindness, and for inclusion." Her eyes scanned the audience, and she saw faces young and old, some who had been with her from the beginning, others just starting their careers. "To each of you I say this," Rachel continued. "You have the power to be a catalyst for change. Do not underestimate your impact. Compassion and empathy are not signs of weakness. They are the foundations of true strength. And as long as we hold on to these values, the work we do will continue to touch lives in ways we may never see. The applause that followed was filled with warmth and admiration, a tribute to the woman who had paved the way for a brighter, more inclusive future. Rachel felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that her journey had left a lasting mark. As the evening came to a close, Rachel found herself alone in the hospital's garden, the quiet peace of the night settling around her. Thomas joined her, his eyes filled with pride as he looked at the legacy they had built together. "Quite a journey, isn't it?" he said, his voice soft. Rachel nodded, her gaze drifting over the blooming flowers, symbols of growth and renewal. "Yes, it's been more than I could have ever imagined. This place, these people, they've given me so much." Thomas smiled, his expression one of quiet admiration. "You've given them more, Rachel. Your courage, your compassion. It's changed everything, and it's not just St. John's. Hospitals across the network are following your lead. You've left a legacy that will endure." Rachel looked at him, feeling a surge of gratitude for his unwavering support. "Thank you, Thomas. You saw something in me that I didn't even see in myself. You gave me a chance, and I'll always be grateful." They stood together in comfortable silence, reflecting on the journey they had shared. Rachel knew that her work was far from over, but she felt a peace that came from knowing she had made a difference. A real, lasting difference. As she walked away from St. John's that evening, Rachel felt the weight of her journey settle into a sense of calm satisfaction. She had come to the hospital as an outsider, but she was leaving as a symbol of hope, a champion of inclusion, and a reminder of the strength that lay within each person to create change. Over the years, Rachel continued her work, expanding her reach as a consultant and mentor, guiding other healthcare institutions toward building inclusive environments. Her story became a beacon for others, inspiring countless individuals to pursue change in their own workplaces. And each time Rachel returned to St. John's, she was welcomed with open arms, her journey a testament to the power of resilience and the belief that one person truly can make a difference. Her legacy lived on in the lives she had touched, in the patients who felt seen and valued, and in the young nurses who looked to her as a role model. Rachel's journey had been long and difficult, but she had transformed her pain into purpose, her struggle into strength. And as long as there were people to inspire, battles to fight, and lives to uplift, Rachel knew her work would continue to make a difference. In the quiet moments, she often thought back to her early days, remembering the uncertainty and isolation she had once felt. But those memories were now shadows, softened by the knowledge that she had created something beautiful, something lasting. And with each step forward, Rachel knew that her legacy was not just a part of her past, it was her gift to the future. Her story was one of triumph, resilience, and the unwavering belief that kindness, compassion, and courage could truly change the world.
Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel so we can keep bringing you the best stories.